Hi, and good afternoon. I'm Garrett Dash Nelson, the president and head curator of the Leventhal Map and Education Center at the Boston Public Library. And you're joining us this afternoon for an author talk with Bruce Schneier and Nathan Sanders on their new book, Rewiring Democracy: How AI Will Transform Our Politics, Government, and Citizenship. Before we start tonight's program, I want to take note of the complicated and contested threads that are woven through this place, including stories that we neither can nor should ignore. The place that we now call Boston is the ancestral and current home to Indigenous peoples. The Massachusetts people lived for thousands of years and still live today on the Shawmut Peninsula. The metropolitan region is also home to other tribes, including Mashpee and Aquinnah-Wampanoag and the Nipmuc Nations. Copley Square, where the Central Library is located, sits on top of a filled tidal estuary that once featured some of the most advanced marine agricultural techniques in North America. The maps that are in the Leventhal Center collections and the many, many collections of other formats at the Boston Public Library bear witness not only to histories of colonial expropriation, but also to conflicts that range from labor struggles to racial segregation. In some cases, the items in our collections didn't simply document these stories, but they actually played a role in making them happen in the first place. Through all of our programs, interpretation, educational activities, and work with collections, we encourage visitors to consider how these histories still exert real effects on the present day, and as in this afternoon's program, how we can engage as citizens, civic leaders, users of historic and present day materials to think through the obligations of democracy and shared common life. Joining me on today's program is my colleague, Jessica Chappell. Jessica is the Chief of Digital Services at the Boston Public Library and one of our leading voices thinking about how AI and library collections can both transform the way we use the collections and transform libraries' wider roles in a civic conversation. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Garrett. Happy to be here and looking forward to our conversation with Nathan and Bruce.
This program this afternoon kicks off a series of conversations that Jessica and I will be having over the course of the next year with technologists, collectors, digital humanists, working with various library formats and AI tools in new and exciting ways. We'll be posting the full schedule of those events throughout the course of winter and spring of 2026, and we hope you'll join us to continue the conversation through a series of exciting conversations ahead. Now I want to introduce our two guests on this afternoon's program, Nathan Sanders and Bruce Schneier. Nathan Sanders is a data scientist who focuses on making policymaking more participatory. His research spans machine learning, astrophysics, public health, environmental justice, and more. Nathan has served in fellowships at the Massachusetts Legislature and at the Berman Klein Center at Harvard University. You can find his writing on AI and democracy in publications like the New York Times, The Atlantic, and on his website, nsanders.me. Welcome, Nathan. Bruce Schneier is an internationally renowned security technologist and the New York Times bestselling author of 14 books, including A Hacker's Mind. Bruce is lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, a board member of the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and chief of security architecture at Inrupt Incorporated. You can find him on X at Schneier blog and on his own blog, schneier.com. Welcome, Bruce.
Thanks for having us. I love that we all have bookshelves in our background. It speaks to what's going on here.
And not even AI-generated bookshelves. But
no, those are actual books that we've probably all read.
Nathan and Bruce are the authors of the wonderful new book from MIT Press entitled Rewiring Democracy: How AI Will Transform Our Politics, Government, and Citizenship. A book which examines AI's impacts on politics, lawmaking, the executive branch, the courts, and even citizenship itself. The book, which I encourage you to check out and read, shows how artificial intelligence is reshaping every corner of democratic life and how we can harness it to make democracy stronger rather than weaker. Jessica and I are going to turn the program over to Bruce and Nathan to introduce the book and speak a little bit about their arguments. We'll then have a conversation with the two of them, and we have plenty of time at the end of the program for questions from the audience. At any time, you can drop a question in the chat. That's easy to do if you're watching us on YouTube right now. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, I'll note that you do need to be logged into Facebook to leave a comment. Either way, we'll get to as many comments and questions as we can in the final third of the program. Bruce, Nathan, we'll turn it over to you, and looking forward to the conversation.
Well, thank you. So welcome. This is a book that Nathan and I have been writing over the past year or so. Now they're gone. We can talk about behind their backs. That we just published a couple of weeks ago, talking about how AI will affect democracy. And our goal in writing this is really to think about all the ways, negative and mostly positive, that this technology can be used in a democracy. We spent a lot of time on different aspects of democracy and where the technology fits in, things that are happening today in countries around the world, things that could happen in the future. And our goal is really to give a realistic assessment of what this technology is going to do. I think there's a lot of doomsaying out there. There's a lot of refusal to engage, but I think there's a lot of potential here, and we wanted to highlight that. So I think we're going to talk about that to start. Nathan has some slides, which he's going to put up. We'll go through those, then have more of a conversation.
Sounds great. And I thought I would help kick things off just by taking everyone through sort of how we think about presenting this huge and varied topic, all the ways that AI interacts with democratic processes in the US and around the world, now and in the future. I thought we'd talk a little bit about how we structure that, how we think about that for the book. Bruce and I are both technologists. Bruce is a cybersecurity expert. I'm a data scientist. But we spend, I would say, less than a page trying to go through a technical explanation of what AI is. It's just not our purpose for this book. Instead, we try and analyze AI and its impacts on democracies through the structures of our democratic systems and through the fundamental capabilities of AI, which we analyze in 4 different dimensions. We think of the ways, the places where AI will have a meaningful impact on democracy, as well as on business, as well as on work and other aspects of life, in the 4 areas where AI really does have superhuman capabilities compared to humans. And those are speed, scale, scope, and sophistication. So AI, whether it does something better than a person or not, can certainly do it faster. And that has meaningful applications in industry and in democracy as well. AI can do things in more places at once than an individual person can. It has greater scale, much like governments themselves. Part of the function that they serve is to organize governance, organize people to operate systems like executive agencies by distributing work across many people. AI can have that same kind of scalability and arguably much greater because of the digital nature of AI. Third is scope. While an expert human may be very well equipped to work on one type of task or a few types of tasks, all of us have limitations in our expertise and our subject matter knowledge, but AI models can be trained broadly across a wide variety of topics. And for example, in legislatures, that's really valuable. Legislators also have to be responsible for passing policies on things as varied as water management and the electric grid and criminal justice law. Individual legislators tend to focus on a few committees, they specialize in a few of those areas, and they look outside of their own knowledge for help. Traditionally, that often comes in the form of lobbyists who provide expertise inside of the legislature. And increasingly, we see legislators around the world looking to AI as well. The 4th capability area is sophistication. And here again, I want to emphasize, sophistication does not equal better performance. More sophisticated does not mean superior, but it does mean that AI systems can take into account more factors at the same time than humans can. And that's also useful in many areas. So I want to give just a few examples of where we see AI already impacting democratic processes around the world that we feature in the book, just to give you a sense of hopefully some interesting and new examples that you may not have already heard about, may not have already encountered. And as Bruce said, I think something that surprises people when they read our book is that these aren't all disastrous examples. We do talk about plenty of risks to democracy. We talk about plenty of misapplications, in our view, of AI to democratic systems, but we also hold up some examples that we think are suggestive of how this technology can be used to positive ends. So I'll just pick 3 to share with you here. The first starts in 2024 when a young person, I think at the time maybe 34 years old, ran for the governorship of Tokyo, the province in Japan. And he was in a very stacked field of 56 different candidates. He was a software engineer, not known as a political candidate, no previous following, independent, not belonging to any party. And he managed to come in 5th out of 56. And the way he did it, the way he got attention, the way he engaged with voters and won thousands of votes in this election is by using AI to help reach out to many more people than he could have done individually as a single candidate. So he operated a YouTube live stream of an AI avatar representing him and his policy platform continuously for 17 days. And the avatar fielded questions from voters, much the same way you may ask questions of us in this conference, in this meeting, but the AI automatically responded to them 24 hours a day and answered in total more than 8,600 questions. So Takahiro Ano, the candidate, was not successful in this gubernatorial election last year, but this year he actually was elected to the upper chamber of the Japanese Diet, effectively their Senate. And he is now leading a new political party, which is hoping to gain prominence in Japan on a platform really focused on digital democracy, focused on new ways of engaging with voters and representing their points of view, which I think is fascinating and suggests the ways that this type of technology will increasingly be used in the US too and around the world. Just show you two more examples. This is one that's really interesting. It comes from Brazil. We wrote about it in the book, but actually a lot has happened even since we locked the text on the book itself. So we have a whole section about how AI can impact the court system, how every party to a lawsuit, the government who may be representing their interests, defendants, plaintiffs in court cases are all using AI at the same time to try and advance their interests and to try and make their work more efficient and successful. And we wrote about how the dynamics of that may lead to an arms race where different sides of the court process are racing against each other to have the most effective AI-enabled capabilities. And we see that actually happening now in Brazil. Brazil is one of the most litigious societies in the world, arguably even more so than in the US. They have about 7 million lawsuits that they process through their court system every year. And they, for years, have been building up a huge backlog of cases as their courts become more and more backed up as they can't keep up with the volume of lawsuits. But around 2019, they started leveraging AI technologies to help improve the efficiency of their court system, and it started to have some impact. As you can see on the chart here, as soon as 2020, they were starting to actually catch up to even out the number of new lawsuits filed and the number of lawsuits that they can process. But what's happened since then is that they've continued to leverage AI to more efficiently process and close more and more cases. But at the same time, they're seeing litigants also leveraging AI to file lawsuits, and that's also happening at a higher and higher volume. So for now, it seems like they're actually winning out and the backlog is shrinking, but they're very well aware that the dynamics of that could change and it could go in the opposite direction at any time. The last example I'll share with you is actually some of our work here in Massachusetts. Myself and some of our colleagues have built a platform called MAPLE, the Massachusetts Platform for Legislative Engagement, that we talk about a bit in our book. And for all of you who are Massachusetts residents, I hope you check it out. It's online at mapletestimony.org. Our focus is on really increasing the information bandwidth between all of us as constituents and our legislators, helping all of us have our voice heard in the policymaking process. And of course, this is something the legislature has facilitated for centuries. We all have the opportunity to drive down to Boston, show up at a hearing, and have 3 minutes to speak our voice in the legislature. And for those who are in the know, you may also be aware you can also submit written testimony. You can send a letter or even an email to the committee, and they can process that as part of the committee process. But most people don't know how to do that. It can be a difficult system to navigate. So with Maple, we've tried to make this dramatically easier by building a website that makes submitting testimony to the legislature as easy as leaving a comment on a website. And we're finding AI really valuable for this process. We use it to organize legislation. There are 8,000 bills filed in the Massachusetts legislature every year, and we make them more navigable by categorizing them with AI. We translate and summarize bills to make them more accessible so that you don't have to be a lawyer or an expert in Massachusetts legislation to understand them. And we're trying to leverage AI as well to help people actually articulate their views, to help give them sort of a co-pilot for drafting testimony and expressing their voice. So Maple is just one example of this, but there are actually examples of similar state-level projects throughout the US and in other jurisdictions across the world as well, using AI to help citizens have their voice heard. Okay, Bruce, I'm going to turn it back to you. And if you'd like to, I'll leave up this slide on some of the barriers to AI adoption and governance that we talk about in the book.
So this is important. We talk about a lot of ways AI is being used to make democracy better. A lot of pilot projects out there. You heard of a few. And one of the questions we address is, what is it going to take to make these things truly useful? And the answer is always, it depends. It depends on the application, and it always depends on compared to what. It's easy to say the AI is not accurate, but is the human it would replace more accurate? Or are there humans that could do the job? So I want to talk about these 4 things. So the first is actually accuracy. Is it accurate enough? Right? Is it accurate enough to read a chest X-ray or to give you driving directions on Apple and Google Maps? Is it accurate enough to summarize a bill in Maple? And it'll depend. It'll depend on the technology, how it works, and where it is. One of the reasons AI is being used in advertising so much is that accuracy doesn't matter very much. Like, they don't care if 20% of their ads get shown to the wrong people. They've already got crappy systems, right? Billboards and ads in newspapers. So that's one thing to think about. The other is security. Is the AI secure enough for the application? That depends on 2 different things, right? Can it be manipulated by the users? So the prompt injection attacks, and has it been manipulated by some third party? And again, it depends on how it's used. Does it have authority to do something? Is it advisory? Is it being used inside a system where you might be able to secure the system? Like, imagine an AI being used in some government facility where there's no external connections versus it being used and interacting with the outside world. The broader question is trust. Can we trust the system? And here it depends, right? If you are a candidate or an attorney or a judge who is using an AI system to write things, right? To write rulings or briefs or campaign literature, you might want a biased AI, right? You might want an AI that is biased with your biases. Just like if you're a judge, you'll hire a legal clerk with your biases. And that's very different than an AI being used, let's say, to make a more general government benefits decision, where it being more universally trusted is more important. So is it trusted for the application, and who gets to decide? And lastly, the notion of power is very important. This goes very much through our entire book. AI is inherently a power-enhancing technology. And in general, we find when it makes the already powerful even more powerful, it's bad for democracy. And when it makes the average person more powerful, it's good for democracy. So something like Maple, which makes it easier for regular people to leave legislative testimony, is good. Right? If it is something where now only the rich can do even better, that would be bad. One of the applications we look at is AIs in the legal profession. And we think about AIs being used by attorneys. There are an enormous number of companies and projects and products because there's a lot of money in litigation. To the extent that these systems make the already powerful attorneys even more powerful, right? That's bad. That's more like money buys justice. If it increases the capability of the average attorney, that will increase access to justice, and that's a good thing. So power is really important here. And again, in all of these, it depends very much on the application. You can't make general statements about the technology. 1, because there are so many technologies, and 2, because the applications are also different.
Fantastic. Having had a chance to read the book ahead of the publication date, I want to say that you're, of course, getting just a little taste of the really compelling and provocative arguments that Nathan and Bruce have made. And of course, this is a topic of live debate in our politics and society more broadly. So it couldn't be a more appropriate moment to be engaging with some of these questions right now. In the next section of our program, Jessica Chappell and I are going to chat with Bruce and Nathan for a little bit. And in particular, we're going to ask some questions about how libraries fit into some of these arguments. Libraries, of course, being one of the original kind of institutions of democracy, at least in the United States. We're going to talk for around 20 minutes, but I want to encourage folks from the audience to drop questions at any time into the chat. I see already that we have some great questions lining up already. We'll try to get to as many possible audience questions as we can in the final third of the program. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you to lead this part of the session.
Thank you, Garrett, and I'm looking forward to what I think is going to be a lively conversation. I also want to say thanks to you, Nathan and Bruce, for your framing of AI technology, the realistic assessment, but also the recognition of power and how power comes into play here. That framing really matters. When I read your book, one of the things I was really struck by is how you describe democracy as an information system. And you argue that AI is inevitably going to become part of how we'll process democratic information and participate in democracy. But then you really do turn it to the argument around concentration of AI and how that threatens democracy and democratic institutions like public libraries. So we really do need robust non-corporate alternatives. Public AI as democratic infrastructure, which I'd really love to connect to the library and the structural question that kind of comes up. You do talk a little bit about governments and the role that they can play in building public AI, but I'd really like to dive perhaps a little bit deeper into this question of who builds public AI infrastructure. Where does it live institutionally? Libraries are really one of the only remaining public information systems that are not optimized for extraction or profit. And we also, one of the things you talk about in your book is how important trust is. Trust is an asset. It's hard to achieve. It takes time to accrue that. Well, libraries have that. We really, it's one of the things that we bring to democratic conversations, democratic spaces. People trust libraries. We are trusted resources. But we're very much organized for, I would say, for the most part, individual service delivery, not collective infrastructure. And I think one of the most striking examples in your book is the discussion of the Writers Guild strike. And you lay out how they sort of used all these four different pieces, of sort of four different kind of collective actions to address AI. And the thing that really struck me about that, though, is that that's a union. And so, not to get off topic, but one, is there an embedded argument for unionization in your book? And then to get back on topic, what institutional capacity does public AI actually require, and who should be at the table building it?
All right, so actually we have something exciting to report. Since we wrote in the book, we talk about this notion of public AI. And by that, we mean an AI model that is not written by a for-profit corporation for their profit. And this is something that was just an idea when we started writing. More people, more organizations have embraced this, and not as a replacement for the traditional corporate AI, but as something else in the mix. And since we wrote the book, this has happened. The government of Switzerland, along with ETH Zurich, one of their primary research institutions, created, built, and released a public model. It is available right now. You can use it. Its performance seems to be about what the big corporate models were last year. But near as we can tell, it is designed, it is non-extractive. It doesn't use illegally use copyrighted material. It doesn't use cheap global south labor. And it is not built on the profit motive. So this is possible by a medium-sized country and university. And as a library, I think your job is not to produce the stuff, but to provide the interface. And if you, as a library, decided to offer this model to your constituents, you now can do that. You are allowed. You can do it today. And I think that's really kind of amazing. We weren't sure whether it could happen, right? The cost has been so high much the past 2 years, but it's been coming down. And my guess is there'll be more public domain models like this, more public models. Nathan?
That was perfect. I just want to add to that by kind of elaborating on the argument of providing AI as a public service, as a public benefit, which is one of the reasons that we argue for this alternative to corporate AI models that we call public AI. As Bruce said, we really think of the first and foremost reason is to provide an alternative AI ecosystem that has different incentives, that is not driven by for-profit. And one of the reasons why we think that's important is that although many of us today have access to models near the frontier of performance for free, because AI companies and the big tech companies and venture capitalists that are backing them for now are choosing to make them available for free, so we'll all use them, start to use them in our work, and maybe become dependent on them so that they can extract more money from us later, which is a cycle that we've seen in technology many times before. And by the way, in the last few months, we've seen providers like OpenAI introduce very high cost premium tiers, hundreds of dollars a month to use their latest and greatest AI models. We expect more of that. That's part of why we think it's important to provide an alternative that can be operated as a public good, made universally available. When I think of libraries, they've served that purpose for the information ecosystem for centuries in our democracy. It shouldn't be only the elite who have access to information that could be used to make the next inventions of the 21st century or to participate in our economy. Everyone has nearly uniform access to that kind of information through their local library. As AI increasingly is part of the economic model of the 21st century, as all of our work is increasingly reliant on that, I hope we always will have an alternative to the most expensive premium tier corporate AI models that everyone can access. As Bruce said, it doesn't have to be the highest performing model in the world to be useful and to fulfill that role for most people. It just has to be universally available, and it has to be trustworthy. And I think there's an argument that we try and elaborate in the book that models developed with a different set of incentives, not for profit, will actually be more trustworthy and more appropriate for use in democratic contexts.
Do you think there's a sense in which the extraordinarily capacious term AI actually makes it a little harder to get into some of these conversations? You discuss it a bit in the book of, disaggregating what do we mean when we talk about AI. I certainly think from a library perspective about, libraries have been doing the sort of collecting and summarization work that we think about AI, a type of AI being good at, right? We're familiar at this point about an AI, like summarizing a meeting or, giving, the aggregate take from 1,000 medical research articles. What's the nut of that? And library technology like indices and card catalogs and even classification systems are sort of predecessors of that type of AI work, whereas some of the generative functions of AI, creating new images or new text or whatever, are kind of categorically different in some ways, even if they rely on some of the same processing pipelines. Do you think there's a degree to which libraries and other public institutions could provide a kind of model that shows its guts, I guess, is what I say. It seems to me like the current types of chatbot AIs are so mystified and that most users have no access into what's going on beneath the hood. But could a public AI say, show how, I reached this conclusion by summarizing these texts or by drawing on this corpus of training information, or, this is what I know about the world and this is what I don't know about the world. Is some of that unblack boxing a potential path for what libraries and other public institutions might do with more bespoke or customized AIs as opposed to, the general single AI that does everything?
But anybody can do that. I mean, this gets back to what's responsive to the market. I mean, any of those companies could produce an AI model that does all of those things. And to the extent they choose to, we get them. I mean, you go to the Google AI model when you're doing a search and they force the AI results on you. There are links, like you can go and figure out why they produce what answers they did. But all of the models really, it's a couple of things. They're optimized to make you go away, right? The goal of the model is that you leave satisfied and stop answering questions. And because that's their reward structure, they'll give you an answer, even if they don't know it. Right? They're not incented to express ignorance or humility or to assess how well they know something. Right? Now, any company could choose to do that another way, or any of these public models can choose to do that another way. Our hope is if there are public models, they might be incented to have more humility, and this is doable. You're right that it's hard to talk about the term, right? Chatbots are not generative AI. Generative AI is not AI. There's an enormous amount of AI that has nothing to do with chatbots or image generators. And on a lot of our book, those are the AIs that we talk about. In one of your questions, G. Moak talked about that AIs have little context, no wider perspective. The AI that plays chess, we like that about it. We don't want it to have a wider perspective. We want it to play chess. or read a chest x-ray, or give me turn-by-turn directions. Like what it thinks about the greatest state of the world, we couldn't care less. So depending on the system, we want different things.
I don't have much to add to that. I think I'll just come back to the topic of libraries to say that I think it's always been the case that libraries are sort of selective in what types of media they bring into the library collection and therefore offer to users as well. A lot of people, I'm sure, think of libraries as primarily a place for books, but of course, libraries also provide access to film, television, and movies, into video games, into even physical objects, and access to museums, all sorts of other things that we think of part of the civic institution of a library. And I think the same could be true for different types of AI technologies. And as you called out, Garrett, we do define that term very broadly in the book. The definition we use is any technology that can fulfill the cognitive function that historically has been the sole role of humans. And that is intentionally very wide. It does go far beyond large language models specifically, which is what so much of the public discussion around AI is oriented. Definitely important, definitely a huge part of the puzzle, but not the only one that we try and consider.
Thank you, Nathan and Bruce. Yeah, I think one of the tensions that I think we're trying to navigate within the library, and I think this is the tension that anybody working in government or public institutions are right now, is the tech companies, OpenAI and Anthropic and all these other companies are trying to sort of build the big everything models that are the black boxes. They're very tempting, and we do want to find ways to use them and to provide access to them. But there is that tension of we don't know what the product is, which then goes back to well, maybe we need to build. Maybe we need to look at something like the Switzerland public domain model or other public domain models, and maybe that's what we really need to put the emphasis on providing. And so I think there is this kind of tension between, are we part of the market, or do we try to hold ourselves apart from the market? Are we a counterweight to their power, or are we leaning into their power? Where do public institutions, where can we genuinely engage with these companies and the entities that are sort of concentrating AI power, and perhaps pull ourselves apart enough to build the models and the tools that we're talking about, and that would be genuinely democratic and support democracy? I guess, yeah, it's just, I'm sorry, I didn't quite know where I was going with that question then, because it is kind of a tricky, thorny problem. We can do partnerships with like OpenAI, or we can try to build something else. It just, where do we go with this?
I'm happy to jump off from that, because I think we try and think through in our book, section by section, about the different institutions in democracy and the different interactions they should have with AI and with corporate AI. So, for example, with respect to the executive branch and the agencies that operate the services of our government, one of the things that we call for is that, at least from my point of view, in the 21st century, with access to not perfect, but very effective machine translation, I think it's inexcusable for public agencies not to serve people in substantially all languages, at least all languages that can be translated reasonably well by AI today, which is a lot of languages. I think we should demand that our government does adopt these technologies. They don't have to invent them. They don't have to build the world's best AI translator, but this is a case where I think it's appropriate for them to reuse technologies offered on the commercial marketplace in order to fulfill services for people better, just as government uses all sorts of other technology vendors in the operation of government services. In the legislative branch, it's different. I would also like our legislature, particularly here in Massachusetts, to interact with people in more languages than just English. That would be nice, but I think they could do even more. I think our legislature should be increasing the capacity it has to engage with the public, increasing the amount of public feedback it can meaningfully take in and respond to and synthesize in the development of legislation, using AI, using it to synthesize and facilitate conversation with a larger number of people. There are great projects out there that are demonstrating how to do this. One we talk about in the book is a European project called make.org, which is a nonprofit. It's developed technologies that make it easy for legislatures and federal governments to organize massive civic assemblies online with hundreds of thousands of people, all contributing input that gets meaningfully synthesized to develop policy solutions. And there's some interesting academic research comparing that to human facilitation, which is different because it's on a much smaller scale. We can't put 100,000 people in a room, but we can measure how effective each of them are at leaving people feeling satisfied that whether they're in the majority or the minority point of view, that their voice was heard and synthesized in the final outcome. And the research has suggested that AI is pretty good at this. And I think we should demand our policymaking institutions adopt it for those types of beneficial purposes. When it comes to the library, my first thought is really the role of the library here is access to information, access to the technologies that are meaningful to civic life, access to the technologies that are meaningful for participation in the workforce. And again, today there are a lot of for-profit commercial AI models that most people have access to. If they have a computer, a lot of people do go to the library just to access the computer and the internet, which is great. In the future, it may be increasingly true that they need access to the compute and to the ability to call AI models, and the library can increasingly serve that purpose as well.
I mean, again, I want to talk about compared to what? We can say that having an AI synthesize citizen input is somehow bad, but right now you mail a letter to a legislator and it gets put in a pile. Is it for or against? We measure the heights of the pile. So your input is just the width of your paper. And AI will do better than that and can actually do good. I think about this. You mentioned earlier about AI summarizing government meetings. It would be great if we had enough local journalists, if we had viable local journalism in this country to do that. We don't. Right? Social media killed local journalism. So my choice is not a journalist or AI, it's AI or nothing. And local government happening in secret is really bad for democracy. So, I look at these technologies from that perspective and want them, again, to distribute power, not concentrate power. And these are all examples of AI distributing power.
Bruce, you're reminding me so much of Web 1.0, right? Like 1998, 2001, we felt so many the same things about the web and the internet, and there was, big players at the top bouncing off each other, trying to shape the whole thing. And meanwhile, there were all the creators below who were like, well, we can do something really cool here, really neat here. A lot of little companies sprang up, and a lot of what we came to know as the web really did emerge from that. And it feels like we're kind of in a similar moment with AI. And when I hear you talking about like AI and what its potential could be, I'm getting some flashbacks of that. And also how can we maybe avoid some of the missteps that happen there?
Well, this is the problem, right? We're there and we're not there. We're there in that where it's a very generative technology that is improving, by the month, and a lot of exciting things are happening. But back in those early days of the web in the 1990s, nobody had any idea it would be important. So nobody important cared. The difference today is you've got half a dozen tech monopolies that not only care, are spending billions to make sure the government does things the way they want. And that makes this very different. Nathan and I have been just writing a piece on lessons we failed to learn from social media that maybe we'll learn in the AI world. My guess in the US is we're not going to learn it. Right? In the US, the tech monopolies kind of own the government in a way that is going to be hard to dislodge. I tend to look to the EU, to other countries, to do the hard regulatory work. So it could be, right? This could be a generative moment where ground up, we get all kinds of cool things, or it could be the big monopolies stomp on everything. We'll see how it goes.
Can I ask a question about that I think maybe in some ways you are riffing on throughout the book, but this sort of paradoxical nature between expert gatekeeping and democracy, right? In one sort of narrative, those are antonyms, right? The more expert control we have over something, the less participatory democracy we have. And you can think about all sorts of gatekeeping institutions in the past, the media, the law, the professions, the world of formal scholarship are gatekeeping institutions that prevent just anybody from engaging in those sorts of activities. But there's also, a reading of democracy, which is maybe more subtle in terms of its relationship to gatekeeping, right? Libraries themselves were produced as systems of access, which would open up the barriers to access to knowledge, make it possible for people who didn't have massive private libraries to access knowledge. But they were also gatekeeping institutions in terms of what was collected, what was presented and offered and organized. We've seen the really powerful and disruptive ways that digital technology have ungate kept. That's not a very nice turn of phrase, but broken down the gates of gatekeeping institutions. The media is much weaker than it once was in terms of controlling what we hear. Hardback book publishers have much weaker control over what information circulates, and of course, libraries are much less of a chokehold on what you can access. Right, 100 years ago, you would have had to come to BPL in order to, if you were a Bostonian interested in a research topic, and we still hope you come, but you don't need to in the same way that you would have in generations past. AI feels like it really, accelerates some of these same narratives, right? Suddenly, is the average person an expert in everything? Has it opened up some sort of, like universal ability to engage in any topic? But at the same time, the corporations that are building AI, the technologists, the for-profit system around that has gate-kept it in different ways. It's created the illusion of access even where barriers are in place. So, how would we engage more in a more sophisticated fashion around access versus democracy, expertise versus democratic participation? Is there a way to square some of those circles? And is AI going to force us to confront some of those incompatibilities?
I think those are great considerations, and clearly there's some areas where I think AI is appropriate to use and others where it's not. So I think about this a lot with respect to democratic participation in policymaking and in legislatures. And there are, with respect to gatekeeping, different parties have a different role ideally to play in that function. Mm-hmm. All of us who are residents, constituents of a district, have, I think, at minimum, a lived experience and personal interests and personal values to bring to bear. And I think it's appropriate for all of us, as many as possible, to participate in that process. This is useful, I hope, not only to the legislature to accurately serve their function of representing our interests, but it's also useful for all of us. Another purpose of democracy is to help all of us form our own opinions and participate in the democratic process. For the government to be by us and, of us and by us, we need to be going through that effort. And if we sit out of elections, if we sit out of the policymaking process, if we sit out of policy deliberation, we're not serving that constructive function of democracy. So I don't want there to be any gatekeeping with respect to all of us sharing our individual perspective and lived experience with legislatures. But no, what I'm not saying is that we're all individually the world's expert on every policy and technical discussion that may happen in the legislature. There are different parties that would want to be represented there. And, Bruce said earlier, I think the perfect words, AI's role compared to what? The compared to what that we have today is largely lobbyists, largely representing for-profit corporations, representing that technical expertise. This is such a pervasive function in the United States that scholars actually refer to lobbying as a legislative subsidy, meaning that corporations are subsidizing the legislature by providing technical expertise that the legislature can't afford to pay for themselves. They rely on that free work being done by largely corporate lobbyists to enable them to do technical analysis. Now, I don't think it's appropriate to completely replace that. I mean, companies also have interests that are valuable to our economy and to all of us as workers, and they should have some function in that. But I think it would be great if they were the less exclusive arbiters and gatekeepers of that kind of technical information. I think it would be great if legislators had a better way to connect to people who do legitimately have expertise in their community, who may not otherwise have the time to share that with the legislature. And by the way, if they had access to reliable information systems that could help them access that kind of technical information without relying on a lobbyist showing up at their door. To be sure, current day large language models are an imperfect way to access the kind of technical information, but in some cases, are they probably comparable to the type of technical expertise you get from a lobbyist? I think in some cases they will be, and are they, at least in some cases, possibly less biased than a representative of a particular corporation? I think at least in some cases they could be, and I hope that we can steer the development of that technology to make it increasingly more accurate and increasingly less biased over time.
Jessica, do you want to pose a final question before we turn it over to our audience? And as a reminder, please feel free at any time to drop a question into the chat. We'll try to turn to audience questions in just a little bit.
Yes, well, as Garrett, as we open it up to the attendees, one thing that I'd like to ask you about the pace of change, because one thing that I certainly kept thinking about as I was reading the book was what a challenge it must have been to write it, given the pace of technological change, how quickly AI has moved just in the past year to 18 months, but also the pace of regulatory and political change, specifically within the US within the past year. So yeah, how did that feel as you were writing? Were you putting that out of your mind as you were writing, or was that something that just every day you opened up and you thought, okay, now what do I have to rewrite to match what's happening now?
And are you worried that people will only read the ChatGPT summary of your book rather than
Yeah.
Oh, Bruce, you're muted.
All right. You can't put that out of your mind, right? The goal is to write a book that speaks to the moment. And, like this is a book that speaks to 18 months ago is not a really good way to sell it. So we are always noticing what's happening and regularly stuff we wrote initially, this will happen. We would cross out and write, this did happen and give the story. And I think that's fun. That's exciting. And I mean, you heard about the Swiss model, which happened after the book went to bed. And there'll always be new things, but we do try to make it as current as possible. And the trends didn't change. I mean, maybe the examples did, but the trends did not. We never got to the point where saying, well, we thought that crazy idea, and then or this crazy idea is now true. It was pretty much what we thought. Politics was equally exciting. I mean, I'm not going to lie. We did write most of the book for the Harris administration, and we did have to speak to the moment of what it's like being in the authoritarian hellhole we find ourselves in, and we did do that. Although this really is a book about AI and democracy, not about AI and authoritarianism, not about how AI could save democracy. It's really a book about AI in a functioning democracy. And it's not US only. I mean, it's all over the world. There are a lot of countries, there are a lot of cool things happening. And we write about that. And it sounds like Nathan's kids just came home.
This is true. And it is the case that we were constantly replacing things that were speculations in earlier drafts of our book with things that actually happened. We had written about the idea that a candidate might use an AI avatar to represent himself. And then that happened in 5 different places around the world while we were writing the book. We talked about the idea that someone might actually develop a policy platform and even invent a political party using AI to sort of synthesize the views of constituents. And then that happened in 3 different places in the world while we were writing. So it was fun to drop those examples in, but it was also kind of terrifying thinking about what else is going to happen between when we lock the text of the book and when it comes out. So it's fun to be able to share with you today some things that are very up to the moment, like that Swiss model Apertus that just came out, and like this example from Brazil that has evolved so much even since we wrote the book.
Fascinating. For those of us who work with collections that are sometimes hundreds of years old, the pace of current day change can be dizzying. Why don't we take a few questions from the audience? Feel free at any point to chime in and add questions, and we'll build the conversation from there. Let's maybe start. You've talked quite a bit about the law and the formal institutions of the law. Priscilla Douglas asks, is it possible that attorneys will be disintermediated? Is the historic profession of the attorney as the profession that controls access to the legal system, is that at risk of falling away?
We don't know. Certainly in the United States, the American Bar Association does all the things possible to make that not happen. There was a website, a program a few years ago, and what it would do, it would help you contest traffic tickets, and you didn't need an attorney. It did all the paperwork, and they were charged with practicing law without a license because the law profession didn't like the fact that there could be an app that will replace an attorney. The interesting question about sort of all the apprentice-based professions, right? Law, medicine, architecture, a financial advisor, any place where you learn by doing. That if AI replaces a lot of the entry-level jobs in those professions, where do the senior partners come from? I think legal professions are really going to have to figure that out. If AI can make each junior attorney 5 times more effective, so I can hire 1/5 of them. I have a much smaller pool to promote.
Yeah.
Joel, in a question, talks about attorneys already fight by syncing opponents in large volumes of documents. Yes, and AI is being used to help analyze those documents. And so this is one of the many arms races we're going to see in these sorts of professions, right? AI is producing the things versus AI is analyzing them. We see that in hiring. AI produced resumes means everybody applies for a job, which means you now have to have an AI doing the initial screening. And what Nathan talked about in Brazil, all of these are going to happen. I want a world where there is more access to justice, where an attorney can do more for their clients through AI. I don't know if that ends up being a world where an AI is your attorney. I mean, in some cases that might be okay because all an attorney has to really do is file paperwork. But in cases where you need judgment, where you actually need human argument, that feels like that's going to be harder, but that AIs will enhance. Enhance versus replace is a way to think about this.
Shall we take a question from Jane, who asks very pertinently to this conversation, what might a library expression of democratic AI look like? Jessica, do you want to jump in on this as well? And
let's ask the librarians to answer this question. I think so.
You're really putting me on the spot. No, I think, what a library expression of democratic AI might look like is certainly something along the Swiss model that Bruce talked about, which I saw that announcement when it came out and certainly checked it out. So something that is not built for extraction and profit, something that is as transparent as it can be, something that's built on known training data. So we know it respects IP, intellectual property rights, and copyright. We know it's public domain. It's been, to the best of our ability, debiased. It's something that really represents the community, or that the community, we can tell the community what it is, according to our values, according to our principles. And it can be a trustworthy resource in the same way that the other resources we offer through the library are also trustworthy. You know that if we are offering them to you, that this is something that the library has put some thought and investment into. It's something that you have a reasonable expectation of it not being built to, how can I put this nicely? Not to mine you for either your money or your attention or your your life, your experience. I think one of the things when I think about AI right now and how it's being trained, and there's a fair amount of extraction. Everybody knows about how it has scraped the web, of course, and many times over. But there's also the extraction of collections materials and metadata and all this other, just vast amount of human experience and knowledge that is being put into these products, into data sets, without community having any kind of oversight or having any kind of input. And I'm sorry that I can't quite remember where you talked about that in your book, Nathan and Bruce, but you did at one point sort of talk about there being a mechanism for input from the community. And I think that a library, public AI through a library, that would have to be part of it, is that there's a mechanism for the community to help shape it and to help govern it.
Right.
That's totally right. We talk about the principles that AI has to follow to be democratic, and you put your finger on what we think is the biggest one that's not really out in the marketplace today, that the market is not really providing for, and that's being meaningfully responsive to public input, steering the development of AI, the principles by which it's developed, principles like content creators whose content is being used to train a model should be compensated for that, are not really represented. And in a model that is a true implementation of public AI, it absolutely needs to be. So for all the corporate AI models today that are free to use, or even free in their weights, so you can download the model and retrain it for your purposes, none of them are really meaningfully responsive today. And I think that's a huge requirement for the model, not only to be democratic, but to be trustworthy for lots of other uses, to know that you have influence over how it's developed and the future implementation and capabilities of that model.
I would also add, and this is building off of what we've known in libraries for a long time, is that I think libraries are particularly attuned to the sort of social and human infrastructure which is needed for technical infrastructure to work at scale in a democracy. We've thought a lot about, for instance, what I would call the kind of failed promises of the open data movement, a movement which really came of age in the Obama era, this idea that governments and, public agencies would put large amounts of data online and it would become accessible to a democratic body politic. And mostly what we found is like, sure, the data's there, but is anybody actually using it in a substantial fashion? Oftentimes the answer is no. And one of the reasons is we haven't built the kinds of educational, training, social organizations that would help people into that kind of use. So for instance, at the Leventhal Center, we're oftentimes engaging with map data, and a staggering amount of map data that is available and open online. But unless you are an expert or a real estate company or an AI company, you may not have much of a handle on how to get into that or use it for productive purposes. And I think in the same way with AI, right? We could put the model weights online for some giant LLM, but are most people going to be able to do very much with like a giant matrix of model weights? Probably not. Whereas if we invite people to think about how, I love your examples because they talk about the practical use, right? How does this help me engage with my legislators? How does it help me summarize a corpus of knowledge? How does it help me do something in my community and build the actual practical human infrastructure around that and help people into that conversation? That to me feels crucial and also crucially omitted by the for-profit companies. Bruce, you used the example, like the for-profit companies just want to close the conversation as quickly as possible. And we may, in a library setting, want the opposite, to actually have a more slow and procedural and intentional way of working with people. Let's see. We've got just under 5 minutes left in the program. What else have we got for questions? We've got one about political economy, and since your book is very much attuned to political economy, Joel asks, if AI could eliminate means of livelihood, then democratic politics are likely to adopt positions against AI. How do we consider this sort of political economy in the regulatory uptake of AI? If AI is seen as something threatening or undermining people's jobs, people's industries, how will that shape the political response to AI?
I mean, we saw this with social media. As soon as politicians realized that they could use the powerful surveillance power of social media to send highly tailored messages to potential voters, they were all against regulating that industry. I worry about that too. I worry that the politics is going to shape the policy more than it should. Worrying about tech worker displacement is a huge thing. We don't really talk about in the book because it's really a different topic than democracy, but it's something we have to deal with. And whether it's something like a universal basic income because there are no jobs left, whether there will be all these other jobs that will show up now that we are free from doing, I don't know, the drudgery of being an attorney. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. But I do worry about the near-term politics perturbing the conversations we should have.
All I would add to that is I think ultimately the biggest central question underlying our book is, will the effects of AI be to concentrate power in an increasingly smaller number of hands, or will it be to distribute power? I think the technology itself doesn't decide that question. What we do as a society and the choices we make of integrating the technology decides that question. And look at what's happening right now. In the past few days, NVIDIA, the company that is primarily among all the companies benefiting from AI, NVIDIA has benefited the most. This company that most people probably hadn't heard of a year ago just passed $5 trillion in value, an incomprehensible number that 10 years ago, I don't think any economist would have ever thought any company would ever reach. Truly unfathomable. Is that the outcome that we want for our society and for our economy, to want for one company or any one small group of people to control that much wealth and power? Or is there something that we can do today to reshape it? We conclude our book trying to outline what it would look like, what a political movement would look like to try and steer society in another direction. As Jessica and Garrett called out earlier, we look to unions. We look to the Writers Guild strike as an example of what it looks like to face corporate power to try and distribute power using AI instead of allowing corporations to use it to concentrate their own power. I think there are a lot of lessons that we try and spell out from that we can apply more broadly across the economy and society. And I hope that you will pick our book. I hope you'll engage with those ideas, whether you feel the same way that we do about them or not. I think it's perhaps the central question for us in the 21st century.
Well, thanks. That is a perfect way to conclude the hour. And I hope you will pick up Nathan Sanders and Bruce Schneier's new book from MIT Press, Rewiring Democracy, at your local bookstore or your local library as well. Bruce and Nathan, thank you for joining us today on behalf of both Jessica and myself. This has been the perfect way to open up a series which will pursue the question of how AI is changing our work as librarians, changing our world as people who engage with library collections, and of course, as members of a democratic polity. It's been a fantastic conversation this afternoon. And for those of you tuning in online, we'll circulate a link to the recorded broadcast after the program. We hope you'll join us soon for another BPL or Leventhal Center program in the months to come. Thanks again, everyone.
Thanks for hosting. That was fun.
Thank you.